If I seem angry at you, it's because the sun is operating from that direction and it's almost blinding me really. I should find a better place. Alright, this is much better. The epic backdrop is behind me. You can be envious of me in your office job, although in all honesty the true epic place is there. However, that's a national park and I can't enter there, at least not on a bicycle. Anyhow, imagine the year of our Lord today isn't 2021 or whichever you're watching this, but actually 1989, and yours truly, which is me, is 9 years old. And the round table discussion is proceeds with full steam, and the communism is falling and Poland is becoming this great capitalist utopia, and my 9-year-old self doesn't care much about it at all because I'm 9 years old, as you would imagine. However, around that year, I think the only Polish manufacturer of bicycles, the Wheelset from Bydgoszcz, I think it was. Anyhow, the pretty much a monopolist, communist maker of Polish bicycles, finally embraced something that came from the rotten west, which was the mountain bike. You know, after 10 years of it being more or less popular in the west, the powers of the government decided that this particular pastime isn't rotten to the core by capitalism and can be enjoyed by common folk of towns and villages across the country. Anyhow, what was produced back then was the first Polish mountain bike, the Wheelset Mustang, and I am currently sitting on a pretty colorful reimagining of this bicycle because I am ridden with nostalgia, and my 9-year-old self from way back then really wanted to have that bicycle. Unfortunately, even back then it was kind of expensive and kind of elusive to get. I've gotten my first proper, more or less proper mountain bike, I think in 1997 or something like that. Anyhow, the topic of this video is what I'm currently riding, which is the reimagining of the 1989 Wheelset Mustang, and I invite you to join me on this trip there mentally and over there. I just knocked my glasses. Over there physically, as we're going to discuss my newest creation. I think I need a 29er, don't I? Anyhow, as with anything that are fueled by nostalgia, I need to get out of this mud. As with anything that's fueled by nostalgia, this build has been actually caused by the fact that I'm getting older and the Grim Reaper is knocking at my door, saying with her squeaky voice, or maybe shrill voice, shrill sounds better, saying with her shrill voice that you're next. And as such, I'm trying desperately relive the parts of my youth that I wasn't able to when I was actually young. However, as you can imagine, cocaine-filled orgies aren't really on the menu anymore, so I thought that making myself a sweet-ass bicycle that is a far cry from the times when I was young is kind of a good idea. Besides, I like tinkering with bikes, if you haven't noticed yet. And yes, it's raining, but though it's kind of refreshing really. Where does the trail go from here? I can't see any markings. I'm going to follow one of those paths that are created by the logging equipment or farming equipment, but I don't really know whether I'm going in the right direction. Oh, there it is. Alright, now to think of it, I don't really like humans, so cocaine-filled orgy probably wasn't really a thing for me anyway, and if you're doing a cocaine-filled orgy without humans involved except yourself, you're just a druggie. Anyhow, the basis of my build Get on why. The basis of my build is a German aluminum frame by the brand called Max with 2 axes at the end, which I bought cheaply like 5 years ago. And I think I even featured this on the channel. Now you might ask why I haven't used the original Romet Mustang frame, because in all honesty they prop up on the used marketplace over here. However, the main problem is that between the age of 9 and the age of 41 I have gained something like a 1.5 feet of height, and the original frame is simply too small for me. Besides, I wanted to make this a modern reimagining of the original thing, not making something like a replica. Oh, so let's take a look at the frame. Now take a look at this, and this is absolutely epic. Actually, it's not really epic, it's pretty mundane. The frame here is a pretty basic aluminum frame from Taiwan, which was originally sold by a brand called Max from Germany. It's a brand that specializes in selling custom painted, or custom is a large word for that. They are just powder coating paints, frames in variety of colors, and you can see mine hasn't been done by them because it's custom painted in the paint job that's identical to the Romet Mustang of years past. This is actually the same frame I have reamed to accept a bigger seat post. It's currently, the insertion is I think down here, and as you can see nothing has happened in the 3 years since I done that job, so take that as you will. Anyhow, this is the frame, nothing special about it. Obviously it's 23 inches because I'm a big boy. As you can see from here, or you can kind of estimate, from here to here there are 77 centimeters. So let's continue on our journey. Tourists, they are going to litter up every place you're going to allow them to enter. Lovely, isn't it? You know what, I'm just going to take this and throw it in the garbage can once I'm down in the valley. People on skis are skiing there once there's snow around. Anyhow, as you can imagine, an anonymous Taiwanese frame that's made for a very generic term of mountain bike, apart from having horrendous angles and geometry, at least in the modern understanding of the word, is also meant to accept 100mm generic mountain bike fork, which is also suspended. However, 100mm of suspension, I think. Anyhow, however, what I was talking about. All right, the original Mustang doesn't have a fork because the original Mustang was simply a repurposed trekking, let's call it like that, frame. So it was meant to use a rigid fork, and because I want to recreate the feeling of the absolutely horrendous early 90s mountain bike, which is actually pretty epic considering that early 90s mountain bike is currently the meme of the industry, the gravel bike. Oh my god, I'm stuck again. Alright, let's cut the chase. I'm using a rigid fork, obviously, because early mountain 90s something is simply a gravel bike today. Anyhow, I am obviously using a rigid fork. However, the one I'm using, as you can see, isn't really normal because there's a ton of space here, and that's because in order to compensate for the geometry I actually used a 29er fork instead of 26-inch fork. So the geometry of the original bike, the Max, isn't really touched upon or didn't really modified in any way, shape or form. It kind of resembles the original bike, and if I used the 26-inch fork in here I would have something that was completely unrideable unless you're doing the a velo ball or something like that. What's the name of the sport when they ride around on bicycles on the pitch and throw ball at each other? The wheels. The wheels are obviously 26 inches because that's what you would be riding in the mid 90s or early 90s or mid 90s or late 90s, or in all honesty up to early 21s, early tweens, early past 2010. Anyhow, they are 26 inch and there is nothing special about them, with the exception that I am obviously using my wheel building philosophy on them. So, spokes on this side are thinner than spokes on this side because there's a disc rotor here, and spokes on this side are thinner than spokes on this side because drivetrain. Other than that, the rims are something generic from China. I think they cost like $7 or something like that. 35 Polish zloty, so that's about $10. And the hub, the rear one, is generic Chinese branded with Kellys, which is I think Novatec. And the front one is a Dartmoor 15mm, which I just had laying around. And I have custom, hey, bees. I have custom scare quads painted into orange because that's my favorite color, if you haven't noticed yet. So this bike has orange accents on the wheel, and originally I wanted to use the Fovno crankset, which is also orange, but that one found home on my freeride bike. I probably should wear some rain protection because it's starting to rain, and it seems it's going to be raining for a little bit. So I told you I like orange, and I'm happy I took this because with the experience of the last few days, listening to a weather forecast is like listening to an oracle. It might be correct or it might not be. Anyhow, since I'm really pretty stuck behind this tree because it's raining and I don't want to get soaking wet, and it seems this is just a temporary rain, let's talk about the rest of the bike and I'll be able to finally enjoy my ride. It started to rain a little bit more. Anyhow, the tires. On the front you will find Maxxis Minion DHF. On the rear you will find Maxxis Minion DHR, which come from the early 2000s, or this is the model that's available in the early 2000s, and this is the one that is theoretically 2.3 inches but actually 2.1. Damn, it started to rain a little bit more. I need to find shelter, or at least I would be looking for one if I knew where to find it. Sucks to be me. I hope it's going to be really temporary. Otherwise I'm kind of in a pickle, really. Alright, so that was the tires, and I have chosen these for two specific reasons. One, they are obviously DH casing, pretty tough, and they provide a ton of rolling resistance, and as such, considering this bike is mostly going to be used for excursions with my daughter, I'm kind of using that to level the ability between me and her and my wife and other people I ride with. So I kind of enjoy the increased rolling resistance. And two, I found them in the dumpster. Really, I found a fresh set of Maxxis Minions in a dumpster. They were literally virginary. So how can I reject such a generous offer from the Lord that's currently raining on me? Please stop. You know what, considering the circumstance, I have to say that the tires are actually doing a great job, even though giving them to this particular bike was a little bit of a meme. I hid in a thicker bush so it rains a little less here. So, since I've got a little bit more time still, let's talk about drivetrain. What you see here is a 3x11. The front crankset is a Shimano Dior 6000 series 40-30-22. On the rear we have a custom 11 speed 11-32, which is shifted by a Z, which has a XT medium cage transplanted into it, and on the front it is shifted with a Sensa 12 speed derailleur. And the customness of this cassette is that the spacing between the cogs is actually 12 speed, so it almost works perfectly. Now the gear range is sufficient for what I'm riding. Currently not riding at all. I really hope it's going to pass soon. So I have no complaints, although if you remember, originally I wanted to have something like 4x12 on this one, which was pretty idiotic really, and that proved to be more trouble than it's worth. Technical problems and self-destructing chainrings aside, and I think this is sufficient. Obviously I also tried to make this a little bit more period correct with a Altus or MJ05 FC something 38-32-24 crankset. However, that was not really fitting to my giant posture with its 160 millimeters of cranks, and unfortunately I was unable to get a proper Altus FCCT 91 crankset in time, so I bought this one instead. So not really period correct. Is it really raining more? Yep. So let's move to some other equipment. Pedals, pretty generic 2010 period platform pedals, spinning on a cartridge bearings and pretty thick from what you can see. Let's talk about the brakes then, because I don't think I'm going to be going anywhere in the nearest future. Ladies and gentlemen, on this side we see the front of rain. On this side, however, we see the sun taking over. And unfortunately, above us, the rain is still operating at full force. You know what, I feel like I live in the UK because it's constantly raining, even though I was promised a much better weather. Anyhow, it appears that I'm going to be descending now. So, let's talk about my brakes. As you can see, are disc brakes. Because, well, the original Mustang obviously didn't have them. It was actually running a cantilever brakes, which was the first thing that drew my attention when I saw it for the first time. However, I am not suicidal, and I've got only the worst kind of memories when it comes to rim brakes, so obviously disc brakes on this thing were an obvious choice. However, you might be questioning my choice of brakes, because as you can see, I'm using the Zoom X-Tech brakes, which I reviewed on the channel, on the front, on the back, and I am molesting them with a regular V-brake lever, suit the spelling to your own preference. Now, the reason for this is that it's an interesting trick you're not going to find mentioned anywhere. Oh, I also failed to mention that the rear brake is routed with my patented one-piece compressionless housing, and it works brilliantly. Anyhow, a little or very rarely mentioned trick when it comes to road brakes or the disc road brakes is that if you couple them to a mountain lever, so the V-brake lever, they actually operate almost in a hydraulic fashion. The lever is pretty hot and the bite is pretty significant really, and the rain is getting even more annoying. However, the rain notwithstanding, 160mm rotors appear to be sufficiently sufficient for yours truly, or at least I hope so, because I'm really trying to descend now instead of talking to the camera like an idiot in the woods. So, see you on the bottom of this particular hill, or this hill here, in the rain. So epic. And it turns out that my belief that I'm not going to be needing any more suspension has been vindicated, because this bike has no suspension whatsoever, and usually my bikes have 150, 160 or 180, where these bicycles I dare to venture in the mountains. So there's 160, 150 or 180 millimeters of margin of stupidity I can, well, act in. On this particular machine, the only thing that keeps me safe is going slow enough so I'm not going to fly somewhere. Moreover, my mountain bikes have a dropper post with 150 or so millimeters of drop, and this thing has nothing. So I need to go slow. And I'm perfectly fine with this, because this completes the 19 experience. Although not really. What really completes the 19 experience are the controls. There you go. This is my cockpit. 640 millimeters of width. Obviously that's kind of wide for that particular period of time, but you know, I'm a big boy. However, I've got obviously the bar ends. The shifter here is Sensa 12 speed. This is an original period correct shifter from Shimano, which is a thumb shifter for the front. V brakes, long stem 100 millimeters. Some spacers below this, because I am a big boy, currently leaking some fluid. And this, coupled to this, coupled to this, and this, makes it kind of difficult to go fast. Alright, let's finish this one off. A day has passed since I recorded the previous clips. Unfortunately, I've spent the last evening on the phone trying to finally force the reptilians to send lenses to the orbital cannon on my Star Destroyer, because my friends at Illuminati are getting impatient, and if things continue going this way, my inevitable glorious reign of terror is going to be postponed by another year. You can imagine that's kind of frustrating. But before I conclude the video, let's go through the details I omitted in the previous clips. This is the saddle. This is my usual saddle with a boing boing system, which is supporting my overwhelming abundance pretty well. So in spite of this generating quite a bit of snickering from quite a few people, it's here and it's here to stay. As you can see, the bike is equipped with a front and rear mudguard and a rack, and that's because, as I said in the video, I mostly consider this to be a commuter, and I intend to ride with my family, so the rack is there in order to provide some sort of a support for panniers. The mudguards are there because it's a commuter, and if I'm going for a multi-day or, well, a long trip with my family, which we do every once so often, I want to have some sort of a protection from the weather. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room, which is this bike isn't precisely period correct, because obviously I couldn't stop myself from using quite a bit of modern parts. And in spite of some people on certain places claiming that everything good has already been and now everything sold by the cycling biz is just there to make the money and the meme, whatever the meme of the day is, there is actually quite a bit of progress in the recent years, and obviously I am benefiting from it quite immensely in this particular build. So let's outline the differences. I am using a Maxxis Minion DHF and DHR tires from the first generation. They are obviously not the pinnacle of a mountain tire these days. These are, of all the things, a 60A, so the hard compound. Obviously they are not great by today's understanding, but they are still bounce better than the plastic tires you could get in the early 2000s or early 90s, and they are definitely better than the tires that came originally on the bike I'm trying to LARP here as. How about a clutch derailleur? How about me lubing the chain? Anyhow, how about a clutch derailleur? Obviously in the early 90s you wouldn't have something like this, because clutch has become pretty much a standard issue on a mountain bike just 10 years ago or so. However, if you were riding a standard early 90s derailleur, all you would be hearing on a downhill will be that clickety clackety sound of the chain hitting the chainstay and generally making a racket. I had perfect silence yesterday, and you can see, in spite of the chain rattling around as it could, or as much as it could, the chainstay here is essentially still clear, and I'm not using a chainstay protector. It was perfectly silent, so why wouldn't I use something like this, even though this is definitely not period correct. Disc brakes. Disc brakes really became the norm on modern bicycle in the last 10 years or so, maybe 15, to a level that it's now pretty difficult to purchase a bike of significant quality, which is not garbage tire, without them. However, in the early 90s they weren't even a thing, and you could get a set of disc brakes in the late 90s, but they would be extremely expensive and obviously reserved only for the most expensive bicycles. Considering that this machine is LARPing to be early 90s Polish mountain bike, this isn't just period incorrect. This is actually ludicrous. However, the performance advantage of disc brakes and me being old and decrepit means that I wasn't even considering riding cantilevers or even foul brakes on this particular bike. By the way, to make the point even more poignant, this fork doesn't even have the foul brake bosses, even though it's for a 29er. You can't ride it without discs. How about gears then? Obviously I'm not talking about the fact that this bike has 33 possible combinations when you would aim for something half of that on an early mountain or early 90s mountain bike. What I'm getting at is that gearing range would be vastly different. The original bike I'm basing this build on would have the 48 by 14 as the highest gear, which 40 by 11 is more or less equivalent. However, the lowest gear would be 28 by 28, which the equivalent on this bike would be something like 30 by 32-ish. I am obviously overshooting this by using the 22 lowest cog on the front, and that's an immense help, and definitely not period correct for the type of bicycle I'm period correcting myself or LARPing at. And I have to say that, in all fairness, this isn't all the differences of this bicycle in comparison to an early 90s mountain bike, because let's be honest, I'm using a better shifter with all those dual release, magic release, and all the other releases Shimano is offering since the, I think, mid 2000s. I am using a better chain, I'm using a better cassette, mechanically speaking at least. I'm using better just about everything. For example, in comparison to my Altus FCMC05 crankset from the actual period, or even later period than early 90s, the Dior crankset is simply bounds better, even though it's a triple and it had trouble shifting to the largest cog when the drivetrain was caked in mud. However, there are quite a few minor improvements that happened over the last 30 years that make this bike much better than an early 90s mountain bike would be, realistically speaking. And it always goes to how far you're willing to go to feed your nostalgia, because, for example, I could have used a 1x12 drivetrain here. It would possibly be better than what I have right now, but I really wanted to have all of them gears, and obviously there it goes. In my opinion, the allure of an early 90s mountain bike is that it puts the minimum amount of hardware between you and the terrain you're riding over, because obviously a modern mountain bike with all of its suspension front and back, dropper posts, perfectly tuned drivetrains, supple tires, and all that good things kind of puts you away from the ground. An early 90s mountain bike was built to survive riding off-road. Was essentially, or in pretty much strong vibe you could get from such a machine, that was a road bike that was simply upscaled to handle the terrain. And well, yesterday when I was riding this, I kind of felt it in all of my body, because on the trails I was riding, if I used my modern enduro rig or something like that, I would just bump through, never really noticing the terrain. Now I had to taste every little pebble, every little stone, every little ditch I had to go through. And it was kind of interesting experience, to be honest. So this thing obviously stays in my stables. Can I say stables? It seems weird. It's going to stay in my collection. It's going to be used as a mountain bike every once in a while. Obviously I'm not going to throw away my bigger bikes because they have their uses, obviously, because I, for example, wouldn't dare to take this on a proper downhill run or something like that. However, what I'm getting at, again, I once again have troubles finishing a video. The allure of an early 90s mountain bikes or 90s mountain bike is the same as the allure of a gravel bike. There is a minimal amount of hardware between you and what you're getting intimate with, and that's a completely new experience which the modern e-bike that belongs to someone else, and it's hanging off a wall here. I'm not going to show it because I don't know whether the person wants it or not, but this is a big rig, 160 millimeters of travel, an electric motor, big beefy tires, and all of the things that make the terrain go away. You just plow through. On this thing, you need to think of what you're doing. And what you don't see on this video is me periodically turning on the lights in this room because I'm in a hotel, which I didn't really want to be in, but I'm here for reasons I'm not going to disclose. Anyhow, I need to turn on the lights periodically. Anyhow, I am also done with this video because turning the light is actually kind of annoying, and the battery on this camera is, well, getting drained as we speak, or I speak. Anyhow, so I hope you liked this video. I hope you liked my ramblings. I honestly don't know how long this is going to be, so share, like, subscribe as you should have already, and I hope to see you on the next one.